The West's most dangerous military adventure in Europe since World War II is imminent. NATO warplanes are in the air.
The Serbs say they're fighting a war against ethnic Albanian terrorism.
What are you actually fighting for?
Everybody knows.
What?
Now we want independence.
President Clinton has led a worldwide chorus of condemnation over the massacre of more than 40 Albanian civilians in Kosovo.
Led by their relatives, I was shown body after body scattered over the frozen ground, many terribly mutilated.
There were no rebels in these houses when the Serbs arrived. They are burning this and other villages simply because they can.
As Serb forces continue to attack ethnic Albanian targets in Kosovo, the fear remains the whole region could quickly be destabilized.
That Serb offensive against the Kosovo Liberation Army shows no sign of abating. Serb forces poured into the province when international monitors pulled out. They are leaving village upon village, destroyed and deserted.
The rebels, too, are breaking the ceasefire.
We have a long way to go to get a political settlement, and we're going to have to do a lot better than this.
NATO forces remain on red alert today as the last-ditch attempt to try to break the Kosovo deadlock appears to have ground to a halt this lunchtime.
Since the NATO bombing started a week ago tonight, 170,000 are estimated to have fled Kosovo.
Yesterday's attack is the latest in a growing list of NATO mistakes which have led to civilian casualties.
NATO today admitted and apologised for hitting houses in the southern Serbian town of Mijalić. 20 people, including children, were killed.
Our purpose here is to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe or a wider war.
We will do whatever we can to make sure that these innocent people who have been driven from their homes at the point of a gun are allowed by the world community, acting together, back to their homeland.
Driving through some of the villages in Kosovo, you can see the devastation. These homes were among the first to be shelled by the Serbs at the beginning of the crackdown. Now this is what the people in the hills are coming back to.
Burnt and looted, many homes have been completely destroyed. But after 7 months of sleeping rough and in fear, at least now there's a chance to rebuild. As families continue to flow back into the villages, they're greeted by members of the Kosovo Liberation Army. The uniformed soldiers offer advice about booby traps and landmines left by the Serbs. They are also recruiting.
The KLA is a people's army and many of its members come from villages like this. The ethnic Albanians they represent make up 90% of the population here, and what they want is independence from Serbia.
As the Serb tanks began their withdrawal back to Belgrade, the KLA were moving in behind them.
Heavy fighting has again broken out in northern Kosovo, further violating the truce in the region. Serbian troops are said to have attacked the village of Obranka with shells and heavy machine guns. International monitors say they're reconsidering their role in the peace accord.
There fears tonight that the 3-month-old ceasefire in Kosovo is on the verge of total collapse. 8 Yugoslav soldiers are still being held by rebel forces who claim to represent the ethnic Albanians, making up 90% of Kosovo's population. UN monitors are trying to negotiate their release, but hopes of success are fading. From Kosovo's capital, Pristina, here's our Europe correspondent, Bill Neely.
There is mounting tension in Kosovo tonight as another cycle of threats and deadlines and deadly gunfire intensifies. One Western diplomat put it bluntly today, "We are very short of time," he said, before Kosovo explodes.
The rebels fighting for an independent Kosovo have new weapons and new hostages. Behind this checkpoint, 8 captured soldiers of the Yugoslav army, pawns now in an escalating crisis. Nearby today, Yugoslav tanks poised to attack. They want their men back. Their president warned today that time is running out before a major offensive. Driving in the middle, the international monitors, negotiating for the soldiers' release.
I believe that the situation here, despite the most recent incidents, is still relatively calm.
Relatively. This is what passes for peace in Kosovo today. Low-level trench warfare, rebel guns facing army tanks. Today, the body of a teenage boy was carted back to his village. Another innocent killed as the army pounded the rebels over the weekend. 2,000 died here last year. In recent weeks, almost 100 have been killed, shot or shelled. Tonight, Serbs showed their anger at the growing violence. They feel isolated, under threat from the rebels. And tonight, another victim, a political journalist, shot dead in Kosovo's capital.
The head of the Yugoslav army is here, an army that's now straining at the leash. The Kosovo rebels are ready. No one here expects the guns to be silent for much longer. Bill Neely, News at 10, Kosovo.
They are, like hostages everywhere, terrified, and with good reason. The rebels who've captured them have killed their captives before, and these 8 soldiers are part of an army that's shelled Kosovo and hunted the rebels for almost a year.
No attack.
Put on show for the first time today, they admitted they weren't captured in battle.
We missed the road.
They took a wrong turn, and the rebels took them. International monitors who've been negotiating with the rebels are predicting the soldiers' release. But in Kosovo, no one is too confident.
One thing is negotiations, another thing is release. And there can be various reasons for not releasing people immediately when you have finalized negotiations.
The rebels who captured the soldiers were out today to bury the latest victim of Kosovo's violence, a journalist murdered, it's thought, by the Serbs who rule Kosovo. More bereaved children, more bitterness, and as the body was lowered, more distant explosions.
Every day of shelling by the Serbs, every political assassination like this one, pushes Kosovo once again close to the brink. Once, most of these people would not have supported the rebels fighting for an independent Kosovo. Now, they do. It's a land of laments and threats, and no one doubts that worse is to come. The rebels may well release their 8 captured soldiers as early as tomorrow, but that will not mean peace. Not at all. It took a convoy of diplomats from Europe and the United States to free them from the hands of the Kosovo rebels fighting for independence.
The KLA has released Yugoslav soldiers. The agreement will contribute to a peaceful resolution of the current crisis.
The rebels want some of their prisoners freed, but more than that, they want Kosovo to be a free country in Europe.
There's no doubt that the release of the soldiers by these rebels has averted a battle, but there's equally no doubt that it has not stopped what everyone here is now preparing for, a new war.
The international mission to bring peace here is becoming bogged down as the rebels push their cause. America's chief negotiator is fed up.
We have a long way to go to get a political settlement, and we're going to have to do a lot better than this. It's very clear that people who advocate an independent Kosovo are advocating a position that is simply not negotiable, and I think they ought to rethink that position.
The 8 soldiers are free tonight. The prospects here are grim. Bill Neely, News at 10, Kosovo.
President Clinton has led a worldwide chorus of condemnation over the massacre of more than 40 Albanian civilians in Kosovo. He described the killings, apparently by Serb police, as an indiscriminate act of murder. NATO ambassadors will meet in emergency session tomorrow to discuss their response. The killings happened near the village of Račak, not far from the capital, Pristina. Our Europe correspondent Bill Healey has spent much of the day there. You may find some of the pictures in his report disturbing.
On a hillside above a small village are sights you hope never to see. Led by their relatives, I was shown body after body scattered over the frozen ground. Most riddled with bullets, many terribly mutilated. All were ethnic Albanians, 3 brothers here who grew up together and died together in their 60s, trying to escape the attack on their village. As we approached the sunlit hilltop, the worst was to come. In a stony ditch, I counted 23 victims, mostly young men, the youngest perhaps 17, huddled together. Most had bullet wounds to the head. Slowly, those who had fled came here to find their loved ones. Look what they've done, she cries. It's a massacre. The villagers say these men were killed by Serbian police. Here to document the evidence, international monitors.
Second injury, centre forehead.
They are military men, but they are shocked.
This is not war as anyone knows it. These are old men, most of them, in their work clothes. And I don't know who did this, but this is not normal.
The Serbian police attacked the village for at least 8 hours yesterday. There is no doubt that rebels fired back. The rebel leaders told me 8 of their men were killed. The Serbs say they shot several dozen terrorists in uniform. But these men wear no uniform and received no hearing from the police, who separated them from the women and children before beginning what one diplomat calls a crime against humanity.
As a layman, it looks like executions. It looks like people with absolutely no value for human life murdering these men who, to me, look like farmers. They look like workmen. They look like villagers who certainly did not deserve to die in this fashion. I don't care what the motive was.
In this gully, in the obscene way these men and boys have died, is a kind of proof. Proof that however much the Serbs talk of peace and ceasefire, the actions of their special police are brutally different.
Jesus Christ. I have counted 40 bodies today, including one 12-year-old girl. War crimes investigators and NATO leaders have been alerted to a savagery that will have grave consequences in a country already riven by tragedy. Bill Healey, ITN, Račak, Kosovo. In the hills above Račak, where they slaughtered 40 villagers, the Serbian police are back, opening fire today in an unprovoked attack as villagers mourned their dead. They moved in early, officially to escort a Serb magistrate into the village. The magistrate never arrived. As they approached, in the village mosque, the victims of the last Serbian assault, row upon row, 40 bodies, fathers next to sons, 3 brothers together. They came to search, this man for his son. Their loved ones had been shot, most at close range, some mutilated. Their grief unbearable. The village was filled with their laments and the cries of children for their fathers.
These people are crying out for justice. They're asking if the world cares about what happened here and who will punish those responsible.
Just move now.
Suddenly, gunfire. We fled the village. The Serbs were attacking again. I took cover. It was the start of 5 hours of mortar and gunfire. Then, across open ground, for the second time, the old men, women and children left their village. They didn't know which way to turn.
The Serb police are now attacking this village in some strength with mortars and with heavy weapons, and they appear to be coming in from several sides, and they are clearly ignoring the pleas of the international monitors not to attack.
Nearby, the monitors watched.
I consider this to be a very provocative act by the Yugoslav authorities, which has again broken the ceasefire.
We left under heavier and heavier fire. No one knows who the Serbs' targets are, but these villagers know who they were in these murderous days in Kosovo. Vilnili ITN, Račak. During a lull and in an armoured vehicle, we went back.
This is the centre of the village of Račak. The shooting and shelling is still going on. Behind me is the mosque where the bodies of the 40 villagers killed by the Serb police still lie. There is simply no one left in this village to bury them.
These men are targets of the Serbs, rebels who want to free Kosovo from Serb rule. They took me to see where Račak's population now lives. The villagers have been on this frozen hillside for days now, with little to protect them against the biting cold. This man lost his son in the massacre, this woman her brother. They are afraid they will be next.
There are at least 2,500 people scattered in small groups across these woods. These people haven't eaten for 2 days, but they're too terrified to move from here.
The Serbs are openly defiant in their use of force against ethnic Albanians, breaking again today the ceasefire they agreed to. Late this afternoon, we went back into Račak to discover the mosque empty. The Serbs have taken away the bodies of those they had killed for an investigation.
We had verifiers on the ground, and we asked if we could go in with their investigation team. And the judge in this case flatly refused.
He's just over the crest of that hill, about 200 meters.
Have they got snipers up there?
So the monitors watch and wait for the next attack, their leader now ordered out of Kosovo by the Serbs. And the defenseless watch and wait. They cannot leave. They are trapped. Vilnili, News at 10, Račak, Kosovo. Serbian forces on the move once more, hundreds, heavily armed, taking over village after village. After 4 days of shooting, they attacked again today. In the hills around Račak, where they massacred 40 ethnic Albanians, they used heavy guns and pounded the area with mortars.
This is the 5th day of shooting and shelling around this village. This morning, the firing is particularly intense. But again, we don't know who the targets are.
As bullets whizzed overhead, we took cover and left Račak. Then finally, proof that this was a battle, that the rebels the Serbs are hunting are fighting back. Rebels fired on these men and there were casualties. A helicopter taking away 1 dead and 2 injured Serbian special police. Fleeing it all, however they can, the ethnic Albanian villagers. Some came down from the hills today after spending 2 nights in the open. But the Serbs are surrounding the valley and the villagers are frightened. International aid agencies are trying to help them.
I mean, the place is in total confusion. People don't know where refugees are hiding. People don't know where anyone is.
This 15-year-old is hiding. He was hit by shrapnel and his father killed in the Račak massacre. And this is the youngest survivor of that atrocity.
Mergita.
Her name is Mergita. She is just 2 months old. Her mother sheltered her from Serbian gunfire and then ran. Born before Račak became an infamous name, she is now perhaps the youngest refugee in Kosovo.
This is one of 4 villages in the area now completely deserted. Monitors said this morning that 8,000 people were fleeing. After today's bombardment, there will be many more.
Yeah, it's a matter of fact.
The international monitors once again watched today's shelling, powerless to intervene. And they're now watching the start of a new refugee crisis. For these are the faces of fear, the faces of the dispossessed, victims of an onslaught, the face of Kosovo tonight. Vilnili, News at 10, Račak.
NATO toughened its stance on the crisis in Kosovo today, calling President Milosevic obdurate and ordering extra forces to the area for possible action against the Serbs. More ships and ground attack aircraft are being sent, including a Royal Navy frigate and 4 more RAF Harriers. The Prime Minister told MPs he couldn't rule out committing British ground troops either. Also today, William Walker, the head of the European Ceasefire verification monitors, was told to ignore his expulsion order and stay put in Pristina. What fired this new threat of NATO intervention was, of course, the massacre of ethnic Albanians in the Kosovar village of Račak last weekend. The verification mission accused Serb forces of killing them in cold blood. The Serbs are now denying that.
With Serb security forces still widely deployed around Kosovo in open defiance of the ceasefire agreed last year, the international community is stepping up the pressure on Slobodan Milosevic to return his troops to barracks. It follows fresh fighting overnight, with both sides exchanging fire in an area around Podijevo, some 20 miles north of the regional capital Pristina. And at NATO headquarters in Brussels, the UN Secretary-General and the head of NATO met to give the new Kosovo peace initiative a critical push forward. Their backing calls for both sides to turn up to a special peace conference within days.
The whole international community should try and bring its collective pressure to bear and encourage the parties to the conflict in Kosovo to move ahead in search of a political solution.
This is a global initiative for all the institutions in order to stop a catastrophe in Kosovo.
The latest brutality in Kosovo came as diplomats were announcing their plans for a peace settlement. The circumstances of these killings of ethnic Albanians are unclear. The Serbs say it was a battle with guerrillas. There were 25 victims in all, including a Serb policeman. And elsewhere, other signs of what the West fears the most. A ceasefire so violated that civilians are once again becoming refugees. By spring, the shattered province might again descend into full-scale war. In response, foreign ministers of the 6 major powers dealing with the Kosovo crisis met in London, demanding the two sides attend an international peace conference and agree to autonomy but not independence for the province.
There has not been one single meeting between the two parties to negotiate a political outcome. We cannot continue to allow that stalemate to maintain whilst the ceasefire crumbles and the people are being killed.
Today's proposals set a timetable for peace that is extremely ambitious. The two sides must start talks by February the 6th, in France in just a week's time. They must reach an agreement by February the 13th. Although the deadline might be extended by one more week to conclude the details, by February the 20th, the deal must be in place. A fresh ceasefire has been ordered to try and stabilise the conflict, and the Serbs have been told to allow the safe return of all refugees. Despite the diplomatic unity here and the immense pressure that will now be exerted to make sure this peace conference actually happens, there is no indication that either side has the slightest appetite for the deal on offer. But despite the latest killings in Kosovo, there is some optimism tonight. Serb leaders have said they will attend the peace conference. All the pressure is now on the fighters of the Kosovo Liberation Army to talk and make peace with the enemy. Robert Moore, News at 10.
The foreign ministers said the Serbs and Kosovars aren't being invited to talks, they're being summoned. Once there, the pressure for a settlement will be fierce.
We have sent the parties an unmistakable message. Get serious. Showing up is not going to be good enough.
What makes you think you can impose and force this settlement now?
Well, can I say to you, quite frankly, of course I cannot guarantee that they will take part in talks in good faith to seek agreement. Neither side can win this by war. This is not a conflict that has a military solution. The Kosovo Liberation Army cannot throw the Yugoslavia army out of Kosovo, and equally Belgrade cannot win a guerrilla war against 90% of the population. Both sides need this political process.
The ministers from the contact group, the US, Britain, France, Germany, Italy and Russia, went to this morning's meeting at Lancaster House with a blueprint for Kosovo ready. The majority Albanian population want independence, but they'll get just autonomy within Yugoslavia and local democratic institutions. It's understood that if the two sides accept that formula, NATO and Russian troops will keep the peace. It's Bosnia again, but with crucial differences. The Kosovo talks will be chaired by the Europeans, Foreign Secretaries Cook and Vedrin. And there was an empty chair today. Richard Holbrooke, the American troubleshooter who forced through the deal at Dayton, which halted the war in Bosnia. Dayton was on everyone's mind today because this is the same formula. Threaten force if the parties won't talk. Forget the detail and sketch out broad agreement, and put in foreign soldiers to guarantee it. But there are essential differences, the main one being that the Serbs and Kosovars haven't fought themselves to exhaustion yet. President Clinton emphasised today that there is international agreement on Kosovo. It's now up to the Serbs and the Kosovars.
Our goal is not merely to respond to the recent atrocities in Kosovo, but to help resolve the conflict so that the violence can end for good. The contact group has now approved the terms of an interim agreement that would do just that, by protecting the rights of all the people of Kosovo and giving them the self-government they clearly deserve.
The Kosovo Liberation Army are flexing their muscles politically for the first time. They command enough positions in the countryside and enough support among Kosovo Albanians to feel they can lay down their own terms to the Serbs and to the West. Despite a warning from their political advisor that the peace talks would lead to capitulation, the KLA General Staff later announced they would go to the conference. To test the reach of the KLA, we drove out of the Serb-controlled town of Podujevo and less than a mile up a side road found a rebel checkpoint. Heavy snow's fallen in the past few days and the two sides seem frozen in their positions. Serbian tanks and armoured vehicles are deployed in the area, but show no sign of trying to push the KLA out. There was certainly no fear of imminent Serbian attack among the rebels, who seem well organised and supplied. In this area, they even filmed one of their recent actions just before the snow fell. The KLA have, in the space of a year, formed themselves into 7 military zones of operation, each with its own commander. One of them, he didn't want to be filmed, told us the army will consist of 169 brigades, though not all yet have been formed. They have a headquarters in central Kosovo and a military leader who has not revealed his identity. I spoke to the soldier who took the video pictures, a 26-year-old who joined 3 months ago. Why did you join?
Well, I thought this is the only way that we can get to the freedom. No other way. We tried with the peace process, but it didn't work, so I had to.
What do you think are the prospects, the chances of success for these talks in France?
I don't expect nothing from this discussion, from this conference that will happen in Paris or London, I'm not sure.
And do you think one of your leaders from the Kosovo Liberation Army will go, despite that?
Well, I don't know. The headquarters has to decide about this, but we're always for discussion, of course, but we never get the chance to discuss. We wait 8 years to discuss and nobody moved anything. Now when we start the war, they are trying to push us back to say, no, you have to get autonomy. Now I think it's too late for autonomy.
Not many villagers have remained in this KLA-controlled area. Fathers have sent wives and children to stay with relatives in safer places. Some 45,000 people have fled their homes in the past month in Kosovo. We found this old man setting off on a 2-hour walk to his farm. He brought some pasta and cigarettes in Podujevo and come back through the KLA checkpoint. The people have nowhere else to go, he says. We'll have to win this war, but the Serbs are strong. What's been remarkable has been the growth of the KLA, not just in numbers, but in confidence. Last March, when the conflict began in earnest, I found that people would just deny their existence. It was a dangerous secret. But now the KLA control large amounts of the countryside. They have a good supply of a limited range of weapons, and their numbers are anything up to 30,000 or even more. There's no doubt at all that the KLA are a crucial factor in any political dialogue, and they could make or break any peace agreement. And though they're an army which has never won a serious battle, they look like they're forcing some of their demands onto the agenda in France. The Kosovo Albanians' biggest problem at the moment is the internal squabbling between their politicians and their fighters. Their greatest strength is the fact that the KLA won't simply disappear off the screen. I don't know which of these people is Albanian and which is Serb, but those who live here do. So far, the two sides have managed to keep their fighting and their no-go areas to the countryside. But more and more people in Pristina are wondering how long they can keep the war outside the city limits. In the past week, cafes owned by both groups in Pristina have been targets of grenade attacks. An ethnic Albanian student died in this one. So bar owners are taking precautions against bombs thrown through windows. Fewer people go out at night, and there's a fear of the violence in the city getting worse. The rock group Jericho Walls was last allowed to perform in public a year ago. Since then, they've had personal threats and now do little more than rehearse in a cellar. Do you have any Serbian friends at all?
I have, but we have no contacts right now.
Really?
Yeah.
When did you stop speaking to each other?
We didn't actually stop speaking, but when we see each other in the street, we just try to escape each other.
Really?
In fact, yeah.
That's very sad.
Yeah, that's very sad.
How long can this go on like this?
Forever.
Number 1 high school in Pristina. 700 Serbian pupils and not a single ethnic Albanian. For years now, the two communities have had separate education.
For 10 years, there were no Serbs in Kosovo, in the political solution.
You're afraid there will be no Serbs in Kosovo in 10 years' time? Why is that?
Well, all the government will be Albanian, and you don't know how it's when you live in the place where you are only minority. People start looking at you differently. You don't have any trust in them.
Our town, there are bombs. We're afraid to go to the movie or theater or cafe.
I had a few friends, Albanians. We were very good friends, and now the situation is critical, and we're not good friends as we used to be.
Radio Contact Radio.
Radio Contact faces an uphill task. It's staffed by the children of mixed marriages and tries to bring Serbs and Albanians together. After the police took their transmitter away, they've been broadcasting on satellite.
The main problem here is lack of communication. Via this radio, people can hear the other side.
Only the drug dealers and the drug users are now contacting to each other, you know, Albanians, Serbs. That's the only connection.
I don't know what to say when people ask me, what are you? What is your nationality?
We can try to organize some kind of love parade in Pristina, just like in Berlin or in Paris, you see, and to give people free drugs, and they can party all day and all night. And I think that's the cure for this.
Pristina's been holding its breath for a year. Everyone knows that not too far down the railway line is Sarajevo.
From Europe's most explosive region to the tranquility of a French castle, two bitterly divided delegations have come to talk peace. The Kosovo Albanians, among them rebels who are fighting to free Kosovo by force. Across the Gilded Room, the Serbs who rule Kosovo, who regard the rebels as terrorists. And into the middle to mediate, 6 countries led by Britain and France, giving tonight a quiet warning to both sides.
It is the people in Kosovo and elsewhere in the Federal Republic who will pay the price of failure in these talks.
Passions are high here, but after a year of violence and 2,000 deaths, the two sides are being offered a peace plan. 3 years of self-government for Kosovo. Ethnic Albanians would control that government and the police, but the Serbs would still rule Kosovo. There'd be no independence.
This is a critical moment for Kosovo. This is the best chance that we have of securing peace and stability in Kosovo.
The parties now have just 2 weeks to agree or face the very real possibility of NATO action. Kosovo's future tonight hangs in the balance. Bill Neely, ITN, Rambouillet.
Within the last half hour, the Defence Secretary George Robertson has told the Commons that armed forces units are being readied for possible deployment in Kosovo as part of the peace deal. Tanks, armoured vehicles and artillery are to be loaded onto ships on Monday to be sent to the region.
Locked in the French chateau and under mounting pressure, the two delegations appear to be making no meaningful progress. This is Balkan diplomacy at its most exasperating, with Serb leaders saying that even if they offer greater autonomy to Kosovo, they will not allow NATO troops onto their territory. The Foreign Secretary has made clear that in the event of failure, military action against Serb targets will be virtually inevitable, although talks will continue through the night.
It is going to be tough. We're going to keep on working right down to the wire to see if we can find a way of ending the conflict in Kosovo and ending it peacefully without military action.
But at the British Embassy in Belgrade, like at other foreign missions in the Yugoslav capital, diplomats and their families began an orderly evacuation. NATO military planners have hinted that if the Serbs do obstruct a final deal, then strikes could begin shortly after tomorrow's noon deadline. Planning is going on in parallel with British-led efforts to form a peacekeeping operation. Britain will supply 8,000 troops, some already on their way, but only if a deal is reached. Western leaders say Belgrade can delay its decision no longer.
Serbia's leaders now have a choice to make. They can join an agreement that meets their legitimate concerns and gives them a chance to show that an autonomous Kosovo can thrive as a part of their country, or they can stonewall. But if they do that, they will be held accountable.
Whichever way the talks go here tonight, NATO will be sucked ever deeper into the Kosovo crisis. For if there is a deal, then 30,000 NATO troops will be deployed as peacekeepers. And if there is no agreement, then NATO is poised to launch airstrikes. Behind locked gates, the talks go on, with just 13 hours left before the deadline. Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic says Serbia will never surrender, even if NATO attacks. Robert Moore, News at 10, Rambouillet.
The West handed the warring factions in Kosovo a reprieve tonight by extending the deadline for a peace deal until Tuesday afternoon. But American and European ministers at the talks in France were adamant that the extension did not mean diplomatic pressure on the two sides would lessen. Our diplomatic editor Robert Moore reports from Rambouillet.
With a glance at his watch and the initial deadline long since gone, the Foreign Secretary only left these marathon talks late tonight, with the Serbs being given another 3 days to sign up to the autonomy deal on Kosovo. The Americans are well aware of the credibility problem for the West now. Belgrade had been warned that no extension was possible, but the Serbs divided the Western powers by agreeing to a deal, but not to the deployment of NATO troops to enforce it. After 2 weeks virtually locked inside this chateau, the Kosovan Albanians are judged to have made concessions.
Belgrade, in contrast, has taken every opportunity for evasion and delay. The Serb delegation bears the lion's share of responsibility for the difficulties we have experienced today.
Either way, NATO is preparing for action. A deal on Tuesday and 30,000 NATO ground troops will pour into Kosovo as peacekeepers. Some British troops are already on their way. And if no deal is reached, NATO bombers, including stealth fighters, are poised to launch airstrikes on Serb targets. The Americans only reluctantly agreed to extend the deadline, and there is no disguising tonight their anger towards Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic. They have warned him again not to miscalculate Western resolve. That, they say, would be a grave error. Robert Moore, ITN, Rambouillet.
Tuesday may be the new deadline for airstrikes against Serbia, but many of NATO's warplanes were in full flight today. 7 giant American B-52 bombers carrying cruise missiles flew into RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire. As they touched down, more aircraft and troops flew out of Lakenheath in Suffolk to join the Balkan build-up.
We're still seeing several hundreds of troops arriving over the next few days in order to allow us to build up with combat power if we have to go into Kosovo.
From Macedonia, German NATO troops launched a top-secret drone spying missile to record Serb troop positions in Kosovo. 2 cameras on board took dozens of pictures during its 30-minute flight.
With little more than 12 hours to go now to the deadline for a Kosovo deal, they're still talking, but the American State Department says it's hard to be optimistic. Neither side, Serb nor ethnic Albanian, has given an unconditional yes to what's on offer. Reporting from Rambouillet in France, here's our senior correspondent, Mark Austin.
As these talks continue for yet another night, there are reports of some progress being made. But the big question remains whether it's progress that can be turned into an agreement by tomorrow.
It's the Americans who wear the sheriff's hat in the modern world, and it's the Americans trying to force through the peace deal on Kosovo. As the clock ticks away, is there any scope for optimism?
That's the wrong question. I am here to work hard.
It was always reckoned it would be the Serbs who would have to be bullied into this agreement, but all day the Americans have had to focus on persuading the Kosovar Albanians to sign. Their guerrilla fighters are unhappy about disarming, and they're holding out for full independence, much to the frustration of the Americans.
What we're trying to do is an interim agreement that doesn't last forever, that lasts for 3 years to prevent the kind of killing that we have seen in Kosovo and that we fear will escalate this spring.
Today, NATO air power continued to build up in the region, reinforcing the threat to bomb the Serbs. But there can be no bombing campaign while the Kosovar Albanians themselves are refusing to sign a deal. For their part, Serb negotiators continue to reject any plan for a NATO-led peacekeeping force and question the justification for airstrikes.
With just hours to go to the latest deadline, NATO's top general in Europe has arrived in France to try and reassure the Kosovar Albanians and no doubt put extra pressure on the Serbs. Foreign Secretary Robin Cook also arrives here tomorrow to try and help through a last-minute deal. But the question no one is answering this evening is if neither side signs the agreement, will the deadline be put back yet again? Mark Austin, News at 10, Rambouillet.
The deadline of 3 o'clock came and went, but from inside the Chateau Rambouillet, no word came, except that neither side had signed anything, much like the last deadline on Saturday. For most of the day, the only official information to the outside press came from the only mediators who counted, the Americans. And more than an hour after the deadline, the first news of a development.
The delegation of Kosovo has advised us, the United States, that it has made a declaration given with full consensus to the following effect. That the delegation, with consensus, understands that it can sign the agreement in 2 weeks.
But when a closing statement was finally handed out, it turned out the delay was going to be 3 weeks, not 2, and still there were no signatures.
We have done a lot here, even if we've not yet done enough.
It seemed that the main demands of the two sides had not really been dealt with.
In the text which the two sides have taken away for discussion, does the idea of a referendum on the future of Kosovo and a binding referendum on the future of Kosovo appear?
This is not in the draft interim agreement. There is a 3-year rendezvous, but which does not use the term. But we know that this is one of the elements of the problem, that the Kosovar Albanians continue to aspire to a referendum.
The people who weren't talking tonight were the Serbs and Kosovo Albanians themselves, not a very hopeful sign that peace was round the corner.
Can you really say that either side has actually moved substantially during these past 14 days?
Oh yes, they have both moved. Indeed, if you discussed with them in the opening days, you would understand how far they moved to reach the consensus that is here at the end of those 2 weeks for a democratic, self-governing Kosovo. We have done a lot, but as I said, we've not yet done the whole job. There's still some way to go.
America and NATO are urgently trying to find out why Serbia has ordered more than 4,500 troops to the borders of Kosovo to back up forces already inside the province. Tanks and artillery equipment are also on their way there amid a strong warning from America against any action. Well, our Foreign Affairs editor, Robert Moore, is here now. Robert, is this as ominous as it looks?
I think we're looking at not an overwhelming, but certainly a significant mobilisation of Yugoslav army and Serb police units. The hope was that this 3-week pause in the peace process would be used to consolidate the peace process. Instead, the signs are that the Serbs may be poised to launch a lightning strike. We've got some pictures lined up which show some of the Serb military activity in central Kosovo yesterday. Now, the West has responded by warning Belgrade not to take advantage of this pause in diplomacy, which was meant to be for consultations, and both America and NATO saying they will retaliate if the Serbs launch military attacks. And let's remember that in the October ceasefire signed by President Milosevic, he said that such special forces as these would be largely kept in their barracks. So it does represent another challenge for NATO credibility.
Well, where does it all leave the diplomatic process then?
Well, the real core problem now is that neither side has signed the peace autonomy plan. The Western strategy always was to try and get the Kosovar Albanians to sign and to isolate Belgrade, and then to really exert massive military and diplomatic pressure to get the Serbs to A, sign the autonomy deal, and B, allow NATO troops in to enforce it. But in truth, I think what we're looking at is that both sides now believe more can be achieved on the battlefield than at the peace table. And I think the grim comparison is with Bosnia. In that case, the deal at Dayton was only signed when all three sides in that conflict were physically, politically, above all, psychologically exhausted. And here, it's not yet the case.
Robert Moore, thank you.
We flew aboard RAF Puma helicopters to the hills of central Macedonia, where the first NATO-led battle group is assembling. An impressive array of British armour, including Challenger tanks and Warrior fighting vehicles, has already been shipped from Germany and Britain. The Defence Secretary George Robertson flew in to meet the troops as tank and artillery crews were practising live firing on Macedonia's dusty ranges. The troops and heavy armour being deployed here in Macedonia, there are already almost 3,000 British soldiers here, form only the vanguard of the force that will be deployed into Kosovo should there be a peace deal. As many as 8,000 British troops could eventually join 20,000 more from other countries. But the Defence Secretary said they will only go into Kosovo if there is a peace to keep.
Well, we're not going to fight our way into Kosovo. We're here to bring stability to the Balkans, to make sure that the violence that we saw last October is not revisited on this region.
Mr. Robertson told the troops he could not yet tell them how long they would stay in the Balkans, but he said their firepower was a powerful reminder to both sides in Kosovo of the need to reach agreement when peace talks resume in 2 weeks' time. Kevin Dunn, News at 10, Krivolak, Macedonia.
The Kosovo Liberation Army, the separatist Albanians in Kosovo, did an about-turn tonight and said they would now sign the Kosovo peace plan. It just could be the breakthrough that everyone's been waiting for, though one KLA commander is insisting it won't disarm. Here's our diplomatic editor, Robert Moore.
There is no sign of the ceasefire on the ground, and the Yugoslav military is visible again. Armoured columns deploying towards Kosovo's frontiers. But even amid such ominous signs, and despite the sound of mortar and artillery fire, there was tonight the first clear indication of a diplomatic breakthrough. The rebel commanders of the Kosovo Liberation Army have told American diplomats they will sign up to the peace agreement, a deal that gives the Kosovar Albanians self-rule, but not independence.
They have authorized its signature. We will obviously be awaiting that signature. And Secretary Albright has been informed of this.
So tonight all the diplomatic pressure is back on Belgrade. If the Serbs also sign up to the peace deal, then 30,000 NATO troops will pour into Kosovo to act as peacekeepers. And if the Serbs do not sign, then Western military strikes are back on the agenda. Robert Moore, ITN, at the Foreign Office.
And said the schools had to tackle prejudice and stereotyping. The American envoy Richard Holbrooke has been in crisis talks with President Slobodan Milosevic tonight about Kosovo. The Serb leader apparently insisted he wouldn't allow foreign troops in, a key part of the peace plan. Today there was no let-up in the fighting in Kosovo, as ITN's Bill Neely saw.
Serbian troops bombarding villages in Kosovo. We witnessed a day-long attack on a string of villages. Tanks pounding houses, soldiers firing on suspected rebels inside. These are the men they're targeting, the rebels fighting for an independent Kosovo. But they too are breaking the ceasefire. Last year's agreement is dead. These rebels are several hundred yards from the Serb front line, and there's been intense shooting here for the past 2 days. But their leaders have now apparently agreed to sign a peace deal with the Serbs. A deal that doesn't give them what they're fighting for, which is independence. We are just days from an even greater tragedy, says Richard Holbrooke, the man who is now pressuring the Serbs to sign up to a peace that, as we witnessed, clearly does not exist in Kosovo today. Bill Neely, ITN, Vučićan.
Britain repeated the threat of NATO airstrikes against Serb forces tonight as intense fighting continued around Kosovo's main city, Pristina. The Foreign Office warning comes 3 days before peace talks are due to resume. Our Europe correspondent Bill Healey reports from Kosovo on the latest clashes today.
The Serbs don't call it war, but war it is, and they waged it today with brutal force. Attacking rebels who are fighting to free Kosovo, who were firing freely today. Using tanks and artillery, Serbian troops surrounded 4 villages, then began a relentless bombardment, pounding hill farms and houses, then targeting a cemetery where they thought rebels were hiding. They hit and destroyed dozens of houses. The fighting is now raging all around these hills, and for a 4th day, between Serbian troops who shouldn't be in Kosovo anyway, and rebels who say they're ready to sign a peace deal. That deal, which is due to be signed in 3 days' time, is, however, now in real trouble. The man commanding these troops, Serbia's President Milosevic, refusing again today to sign up to a deal that would bring NATO troops into Kosovo. Cowering from it all, the civilians caught in the crossfire, many fleeing just before the bombardment began. And clinging to life amid all this, a tiny girl, born prematurely to a mother terrified by the constant shelling. From her first hours of life, we have followed her this week, a refugee from the village the Serbs were shelling to the hospital where she's now recovering.
Baby is better now, it's stable condition, but baby started bleeding from the stomach.
Her eyes open now, but to a land where the violence is escalating. The casualties are mounting, the innocent are suffering, and the 2 warring sides are breaking promises and ceasefires.
Good evening. At least 6 people have been killed in bomb attacks in Kosovo in the run-up to the Paris peace talks. EU foreign ministers are warning the warring factions to sign up to a deal or risk sliding into all-out war. ITN's Bill Healey sent this report.
2 days from peace talks, but no peace in Kosovo. 1 bomb ripping through a crowded fruit market, killing 4 people, including a child, and injuring more than 20. The bomb was small and crude. Who planted it isn't known and may never be. But it's another sign that Kosovo is plunging ever deeper into trouble. 1 hour earlier, and 2 bombs exploded in a nearby town, killing 2 people and injuring more than 20. 1 device detonating near a police station. After a week of shooting and shelling in Kosovo, the bombing is new, but the shelling isn't over. I witnessed hours of sustained artillery and tank fire today. Serbian troops bombarding villages where they believe rebels are hiding. Plumes of smoke filling the skies, columns of new refugees filling the roads. Thousands are now fleeing from the Serb offensives. The leaders of the rebels the Serbs are targeting told me today they want peace, and they're now in France to negotiate it. But on the ground, there are real doubts that the Serbs will sign it, that the rebels will disarm, and that today's explosions are anything but an ominous sign of the future here. Bill Healey, ITN, Kosovo.
Delegations from both of the warring parties in Kosovo are now in Paris, preparing for tomorrow's peace talks. Today, the Foreign Secretary Robin Cook warned that the delegations that if they don't reach an agreement, the talks will be wound up within days. ITN's Robert Moore reports from Paris.
This time the peace talks are in the heart of Paris. The ethnic Albanian delegation were the first to arrive, apparently poised to sign the peace deal that would give Kosovo self-rule, but not independence. Serb demonstrators were also in the French capital. Their leaders in Belgrade are refusing to allow NATO-led forces onto Yugoslav territory to enforce an agreement, a position that is exasperating the Western powers and threatens to destroy a deal even before it's made. So those NATO troops, including thousands of British soldiers, are waiting in neighbouring Macedonia for the outcome of the Paris talks. If a deal is struck within the next few days, they will pour over the border as peacekeepers. But if the Serbs alone remain defiant, then the possibility of NATO airstrikes is back on the agenda. In the 3 weeks the talks have been suspended, fighting has again flared across Kosovo. Behind the frantic efforts underway tonight in Paris to secure a peace agreement lies the fact that failure could trigger a wider conflict that would be impossible to contain. Robert Moore, ITN, Paris.
Well, Robert is in Paris now. Robert, is there much optimism there that an agreement can be reached?
No, not at all, Andrew. You'd have to say tonight the prospects are looking pretty bleak. The Serbs are repeating their line that they will not allow or contemplate allowing in NATO troops into Kosovo to act as peacekeepers. We also know that fighting continues to rage in the province itself. And also, if you scratch the diplomatic effort underway, it's apparent there are divisions within the Western powers, and those are divisions the Serbs seem certain to exploit here in Paris.
So if, as Robin Cook warns, they will be pulled up or rather wound down in days, what will then happen in Kosovo?
Well, this is complex Balkan diplomacy, and the credibility of the Western powers is already badly frayed. I think if the Serbs alone refuse to sign, then certainly the United States and quite possibly Britain will demand that NATO launch air and missile strikes on Serb targets. But the Serbs know that, and for that reason they will try and push these talks into a grey area, into political confusion. And I think that's really where the danger lies for these talks. They'll go into that grey area, and it continues to be a policy nightmare for the Western powers.
Robert, thank you very much indeed.
This is Mijalić, and these are the men who've come to burn it. Until a week ago it was full of Albanians. Today it was looted by Serbs. The man stealing the television is a policeman. The 5 men move from house to house and with a matchbox begin to wipe Mijalić from the map. One, a Serb civilian, robbing his Albanian neighbour, the men making it hard for Albanians ever to return. The Serbs know we're filming them, but they make the law here and they break it, so they burn Mijalić to the ground. There were no rebels in these houses when the Serbs arrived. They are burning this and other villages simply because they can, an open and deliberate policy of destruction and terror. The Serbs call it ethnic cleansing, and Mijalić's Muslims have fled. The policeman, the soldier, and the other 3 Serbs steal more televisions, then a tractor, then they shoot something, and then they leave. Mijalić is no more. The police pass by, moving on to the next village marked for destruction. So many now, in so short a time. Bill Neely, ITN, Mijalić.
In Kosovo, Yugoslav army tanks have been arriving in increasing numbers. The Serbs say they're fighting a war against ethnic Albanian terrorism, and both the deal on the table in Paris and NATO's warlike noises are unacceptable interference in their domestic affairs. Up to 40,000 Serbian soldiers and special police are now in or around Kosovo, bracing for war, say the Americans.
They want to produce the failure of Paris negotiations with the only target to blame Serbian nation and Serbian state for the failure of Paris talks and to, order airstrikes against Serbia. In that case, what can we do?
The refugee problem's getting worse. 5,000 ethnic Albanian civilians driven from their homes in central Kosovo in recent days. So many thousands have crossed the border to Macedonia that the UN says it'll have to start building special camps to house them all. Comparisons with the start of the Bosnian War are unavoidable. It was the moment the Western powers have been impatiently expecting for more than 3 weeks. The signature of the Albanian delegation to the Kosovo peace plan means the thumbscrew can now really be applied on the Serbs. Unconfirmed reports say President Milosevic will be given a deadline of next Wednesday before NATO launches airstrikes. Washington's language was today all threats.
The Albanians have said yes to the accords and the Serbs are saying no. At the same time, Belgrade's security forces are stepping up their unjustified and aggressive actions in Kosovo. And if Belgrade doesn't reverse course, the Serbs alone will be responsible for the consequences.
The observers left Kosovo at first light, their withdrawal signalling a deepening crisis here. The ceasefire they tried to monitor is dead, as the civilians they left behind soon found out. Within hours of their retreat, Albanians were on the road, fleeing their villages. For these people, and there are hundreds of them, the international observers provided some form of security. Now the observers are gone, they fear the worst. And it came. As an old woman struggled to leave, Serbian troops attacked. 3 shells landing close by. It was terrifying. A new humanitarian catastrophe is threatening here. No one is monitoring the 2 armed sides. More violence seems imminent. Vilnius ITN, Glogovac. They have the high ground and they use it ruthlessly. Serbian troops pounding villages with every weapon in their armory. Their onslaught is triggering a vast exodus. Aid agencies say tens of thousands are fleeing their homes in a vast cavalcade of fear. Most of the children forced to flee once before. This child, though, just 5 days old. There are hints in Kosovo today of a humanitarian catastrophe. Are we edging closer to that now?
Oh, definitely. Still snow out there, a lot of people on the move. We're chasing thousands of people almost every day trying to help them. And obviously we're not going to stay very long if something happens.
NATO airstrikes and the pullout of aid agencies would spell disaster for these huddled masses. Serbian troops insist their targets are rebels. They took us with them today and showed us what they said were hills full of rebels, which they then fired at. Serbian troops are clearing a path toward the key rebel targets, like this headquarters in central Kosovo. But just as quickly, the Serbs are headed on a collision course with NATO. For each battle, the Serb troops are digging in. They say they're ready for a showdown. Vilnius ITN, Kosovo.
The flight of civilians, fast becoming Europe's gravest humanitarian crisis since the Bosnian War. Ethnic Albanians from the areas of fighting are still streaming into places considered safe. We came across this group on their way to Glogovac, a town in Serb hands. But once they arrive, they find they're just part of a vast displacement camp, uncertain how they'll survive, afraid of what may have happened to their men who've stayed behind to fight the Serbs.
They might be killed on the houses, the old men. And how we can live if they killed them.
The area around Glogovac has swollen in numbers beyond its ability to cope. Perhaps 10,000 new arrivals in the past few days. Those who can stay in flats with local people, tiny apartments housing 2 or 3 families at a time. Others are put up at local schools. Electricity has been cut in the town, no one can explain why, and there's a severe shortage of water. Many put the sudden increase in fighting down to last Saturday's departure of international observers.
They stopped a lot of actions and help to the people as with the bad situation and reactions, and they stopped the war, the conflicts. And
what do you think is going to happen now that the monitors have gone?
it's difficult to describe, but my opinion is that the NATO troops or some forces must react here, must act, because it will be a terrible situation.
For some of these people, it's the 2nd or 3rd time they've had to flee their homes in the past year. The Serbian security forces know most of the refugees' sympathies lie with the Kosovo Liberation Army, and the war against them is best fought without civilians getting in the way. But as for what to do with these thousands of people, no one has any idea. The Belgrade authorities today effectively silenced the leading Albanian language newspaper, and the last one still operating. It's been fined around £25,000 for allegedly inciting national intolerance. The paper gave details of the military conflict and spoke of genocide.
They want for a few days to make massacre or to kill people, to have many refugees in Kosovo, and to not have newspaper and news to any Albanian people.
There's no sign of the Serbian offensive ending, nor of the refugee crisis easing until either the rebel forces are totally crushed or intervention from the West succeeds. Tonight there are reports of hundreds of people fleeing an area just outside Pristina. The war is drawing ominously close to the capital. Gabi Rado, Channel 4 News, Kosovo.
The American envoy Richard Holbrooke was in Belgrade again tonight, making a last attempt to get President Milosevic to sign the Kosovo peace plan and call off Serbia's offensive. The signs weren't hopeful in Belgrade or in Kosovo itself, where our Europe correspondent Bill Healey today heard the Albanians plead for NATO intervention.
There is a terrible logic to events here now. The rebels attack, these Serbian troops retaliate with massive force, sending thousands fleeing, and NATO intensifies its warnings. Caught in the middle, tens of thousands of refugees who are now pleading for help. Doesn't the world see what's happening here, she says. Europe keeps talking to Milosevic. How much time do you want? Bomb or give us the guns? Just do something. I saw long convoys of Serbian troops and police on the move today. They are moving step by step towards a confrontation with NATO. They say they want a showdown. There are many who believe their president does too. The chances for peace are bleak. Bill Healey, ITN, Kosovo.
Well, with me now is ITN's Robert Moore, who's been monitoring what they're saying about the crisis tonight in Washington and Europe. Robert, what is the latest?
Well, the American envoy Richard Holbrooke and the Yugoslav president Slobodan Milosevic, two of the most experienced and cunning operators in the Balkans, have just finished 4.5 hours of talks. But there's no clear word tonight about the outcome. But all the signs certainly remain very bleak. Mr. Holbrooke has spoken about the NATO being on the brink of war. We know that brutal Serb offensive in Kosovo continues. And we also know, of course, that those NATO forces are now poised to strike.
So it moves towards the military option. What form would military action take?
Well, we know it's going to be swift and we know it's going to be severe. The first wave almost certainly will be Tomahawk cruise missiles to hit Yugoslav air defences. The second wave up to 400 aircraft, which will try and target further Serb military positions. Now, we also know that despite that formidable gathering of air power, Yugoslavia has a very sophisticated air defence system. So make no mistake, this is a high-risk strategy in both military and, above all, in political terms.
Robert, thanks a lot.
From ITN, the ITV Lunchtime News with John Suchet and Julia Somerville.
Good afternoon, welcome to the programme.
NATO forces remain on red alert today as the last-ditch attempt to try to break the Kosovo deadlock appears to have ground to a halt this lunchtime. Talks resumed there this morning after overnight efforts by the American envoy Richard Holbrooke, but they've just broken out without any sign of a breakthrough.
Meanwhile, thousands of ethnic Albanians continue to flee from their homes as Serb forces blast their way through the Kosovo heartland, destroying villages and setting fire to buildings. A few minutes ago, Downing Street said the Serb leader, President Milosevic, appeared hell-bent on provoking the humanitarian disaster that appears to be developing. Kevin Dunn reports.
The American negotiator Richard Holbrooke this morning had a second round of talks with President Slobodan Milosevic, despite an apparently fruitless meeting last night, which he said gave no grounds for optimism.
I would be misleading you if I suggested that today's talks result in any substantial significant change in the situation as you already know it, and they were held against a backdrop of reports that many of you are familiar with of increased military action in Kosovo.
That Serb offensive against the Kosovo Liberation Army shows no sign of abating. Serb forces poured into the province when international monitors pulled out, and they are moving from village to village, ostensibly to root out separatist gunmen. In fact, they are leaving village upon village, destroyed and deserted. Their civilian inhabitants forced to flee in their thousands, creating precisely the potential humanitarian disaster the West has been trying to avert. They are mainly women and children who have been made refugees in their own land. They are paying with their livelihoods simply because they are ethnic Albanians, not Serbs. And because they are sympathetic to these fighters of the KLA, who continue to resist the Serbs, though their political leaders say they are ready to sign up for peace.
And I'm joined now by our senior political correspondent. Joe, I understand the Prime Minister's to make a statement about this afternoon.
Yes, he is indeed. He flies to Berlin shortly afterwards for the EC summit. And this prepare the British people and the British Parliament for the possibility that in the next few days there may well be airstrikes. What Downing Street is saying, as you said earlier, is that Milosevic appears hell-bent on provoking the humanitarian disaster that is now developing. They were also giving out figures this morning, saying that 250,000 Albanians are now refugees, 170,000 have fled abroad, and they believe that 25,000 were made homeless in this past weekend. They say that they've gone the extra mile to try to make Milosevic take the humanitarian path, but they've reached the end of the road now.
And Joe, what does Downing Street say about the military operation itself?
This is going to be a NATO-led operation. It really depends who's got the hardware to help here. It looks as though the US, the UK, the French and the Canadians will be involved. Downing Street also appears to be at this stage ruling out the possibility of ground troops going in, except in pursuit of a political settlement, and they say that simply isn't there at the moment.
Thank you, Joe.
Well, with me now in the studio is Victoria Scott from the children's charity UNICEF, who's just returned from Kosovo. Victoria Scott, we've all seen recently pictures of refugees being taken away on tractors and things like that. Obviously, this is just a tiny fraction of the humanitarian disaster that's unfolding there.
Unfortunately, that's right. I mean, we have estimations that 250,000 people are now internally displaced within Kosovo. 70% of these are children who are tired, scared, cold, having to flee their houses, suffering immense trauma with no access to health or education.
So the picture you're painting is one of which, in particular, in relation to the children's life, all systems of normality have completely broken down.
Yes, and UNICEF's in there at the moment trying to restore some normality to the children of Kosovo, providing them with basic drugs and education. But obviously more needs to be done, and I think the international community still have a responsibility to the children of Kosovo.
Well, it looks, as of today, as if we're heading towards some kind of military intervention in Kosovo. Do you think that this is going to actually, in the short term, make these people's plight worse?
I'm not a military strategist. What the children of Kosovo need is peace. And in the meantime, until that peace becomes a reality, they need the support from the whole international community.
Victoria Scott, thanks very much indeed.
From a safe distance, we saw houses burning in the area of Srbica and heard the sound of shelling. Villages are torched once rebels have been cleared out to make sure families can't return to give the KLA shelter. As we drove into the village of Bajinca, we saw a group of Kosovo Albanian men. We soon discovered what they were watching. It landed a few hundred yards away. The shelling in this whole area started about 10 o'clock this morning. Firing in this direction is a Serbian tank, which is about 1 mile away over the other side of this railway line behind me. The target just seemed to be ordinary farmhouses in this village where we are now. Look out, another one. One of the men there came from the village where the Serbian tank was firing from.
What can we do? Where can we go? Where? Escape from there, escape from here. They're not leaving us anywhere safe to go to. The children are without food. They're here all day and they haven't eaten anything.
Even while the shelling was going on, families began leaving. Many were fleeing for the second time in 4 days. Of the tens of thousands now displaced, one avenue of escape ended today. Macedonia to the south closed its border with Kosovo. Pristina tonight is tense after grenade attacks in cafes and shootings in the suburbs. Its inhabitants, like those everywhere in Yugoslavia, are waiting for news of NATO's armed and ready cruise missiles. Gabi Rado, Channel 4 News, Kosovo.
On one thing, the armchair strategists are agreed. This is not going to be easy. For the Serb defences are formidable. Around 2,500 anti-aircraft guns and missile launchers, and many of the systems have recently been upgraded. They are, in the military jargon, integrated. Radar sites, regional and central command centres, airfields, all linked together. Knock a part of it out and it still continues to function. They're a generation more advanced than those faced in Iraq in Operation Desert Fox, and they're easily hidden too in Serbia's mountains and valleys.
The difference is here, the Serbs have got a system which could jam the navigation capabilities of the cruise missiles. And that, I think, would be a serious risk, that the cruise missiles could then go off course. And of course, there's only a finite number of cruise missiles. You probably want 300 to 400 of them to be launched to be certain of destroying the air defence capabilities in Serbia. If they lose a substantial number of those, there will be gaps, and that means casualties.
Prime Minister, if we can be quite clear about this, in your statement in the Commons, you were preparing the British public for the very real possibility of British casualties.
This decision is not an easy decision. None of the options available to us are easy options. But if we don't act to stop the repression in Kosovo, many thousands of innocent people will be killed or subject to appalling brutality, and we will have right on the doorstep of Europe chaos, disorder spreading into the whole of Europe. Therefore, though it is a difficult choice and a hard option to take, the consequence of not acting, in my judgment, is significantly worse than the consequence of acting. Our thoughts are very much with those British pilots that may be called into action, with their families, with all those people who are part of our armed forces personnel and the civilians attached to them as well. Our thoughts are with them. We give thanks for them, for their professionalism and their bravery. And I wouldn't ask them to undertake this if I didn't believe it to be truly necessary, not just in the interests of Britain, important though that is, but also in the interests of the wider humanity.
Is there a danger that British forces could be sucked into what could become Europe's Vietnam?
We've set our objective, our minimum objective, very clearly. And as I outlined earlier today, that objective is to curb the repression, the brutality against the Kosovar Albanian people. We believe we can meet that objective.
And from what you know of Slobodan Milosevic, is he the sort of man that can be bombed back to a negotiating table?
Well, the choice is his. I mean, he either negotiates sensibly and agrees to abide by the undertakings he's given, or he cannot possibly doubt the resolve of the NATO countries, including Britain, to act.
The West's most dangerous military adventure in Europe since World War II is imminent. NATO warplanes are in the air. Now, NATO fighter planes took off from Italy literally minutes ago. Its warships are at sea. Air raid sirens have sounded again and again in the streets of the Kosovan capital, Pristina. The Yugoslav leader is as defiant as ever. We're still waiting official word from NATO leaders, but as Operation Determined Force gets underway, our reporter Julian Rush has the latest details. Julian, what do we think's happening?
Well, the first wave of attacks has now started. We've seen the B-52s take off from their base in Fairford in Gloucestershire this morning. They carry 20 cruise missiles apiece. There's 8 aircraft based there. We've seen fighters and fighter bombers taking off from their bases in Italy.
And what are the targets precisely?
Well, the main aim of this first part of the campaign is to disable Serbia's air defences. Now, if we look at a map here of Serbia, we can see the air defences are scattered throughout the whole of the country. They're radar sites, communication sites, and missile sites. Some of these sites are in Montenegro, the republic to the south of Serbia. Now, we know the Republic of Montenegro is reluctant to support Milosevic. NATO has said that it can't rule out attacks there, but it will try not to do so if at all possible. The next stage of the attacks will concentrate on Kosovo itself, and there it'll attack the Yugoslav army and police positions. You can see here, these are the known garrison positions there. After that, if Milosevic doesn't back down, then they'll go for wider military targets in Serbia itself.
So what about the defences? I mean, what are we confronted with in NATO?
Serbia's military defences are very good. They have no illusions at all in NATO about how good they are. They've got a lot of anti-aircraft missiles like these that you can see. Many of them have recently been upgraded.
What about British involvement in all this?
Well, the British involvement is quite small, but is part of the 14-nation NATO package. The involvement in Determined Force looks like this. In northern Italy, in Aviano, we've got 3 E-3D early warning aircraft. Now, they're key to spotting Serbian fighters taking off and attacking NATO planes.
I'm going to have to interrupt you right there because we're going to go to Pristina, the Kosovan capital, where Gabi Rado, our reporter, is. What news, Gabi?
Well, John, I think I can say that the airstrikes have begun. This is unconfirmed, obviously, by any military or political authorities. But I myself saw, virtually dead on the hour of 7 your time, a large flash in the sky. It was followed a few seconds later by a very, very loud bang which shook the windows of our hotel. Obviously, I cannot confirm this, but this does sound like it's the beginning of the airstrikes. It came, I believe, from the direction of the airport near Pristina, which lies to the west. There's also a large military barracks in that area. We have been up and down that road many times, and we know that there are quite a lot of military installations. It does, in other words, seem as though the airstrikes have started. A quarter of an hour ago, there's an air raid siren. Curiously enough, there isn't one now. The streets are completely empty. There's absolutely no movement whatsoever in the streets. There was an air raid siren about a quarter of an hour ago. There's one an hour before then as well. It didn't seem to be associated with anything. And there's also one which lasted for quite a long time, for about half an hour, air raid sirens for half an hour, just after about 1:30 this afternoon. But I think I have visual evidence that something has now started.
It's ironic that European leaders have been gathering in Berlin today, supposedly to build the new architecture for the new Europe. But they've been meeting instead to bury their differences and to appeal to Serbia to back down and sign the Kosovo peace deal. They've warned President Milosevic that a humanitarian catastrophe within Europe would not be tolerated. However, the leaders did stop short of explicitly backing NATO's declaration of war. Our political editor, Eleanor Goodman, is in Berlin.
Close to where the summit is being held, the bombed-out remains of a church have been preserved as a permanent reminder of the horrors of war. And as President Clinton and many of the European leaders meeting here would see it, the dangers of not intervening soon enough to deal with a tyrant. Hence the verbal build-up to the attacks from this morning onwards and the warnings to President Milosevic.
We're not in the business anymore of making appeals to him. He knows what he has to do. If he does it, that's his decision. Of course, I hope that he does do it. But we're not acting on the basis that he will. We're acting now on the basis that we're going to have to take military action. We regret that. It's difficult. The consequences are serious. But now that we have decided to do it, we have to do it with total resolve and see this thing through.
11 of the 15 countries belonging to the European Union are also members of NATO and therefore signed up to the action. Europe obviously wants to be seen to be standing shoulder to shoulder against oppression in the Balkans, which has so often before been the tinderbox for conflagrations which have swept across Europe. But there are subtly different national interests which the German presidency has had to accommodate. So even as the airstrikes were on the verge of takeoff, the statement appeared to give Milosevic one last chance.
There is an opportunity still for President Milosevic. All he needs to do is make a telephone call, and there will be a peaceful solution, if he wants that.
But some countries have difficulty carrying public opinion with them back home. The Italians have problems with their coalition partners. The Austrians, as a neutral, have closed their flying space. But it's the Greeks, given their border with Albania, who have the strongest reservations.
We feel that getting involved in military actions could create deeper wounds amongst neighbours in the region.
The Brandenburg Gate was a symbol of the divisions between East and West Europe, which followed the Second World War. Today in Berlin, European leaders have given their political backing to the first attack on a sovereign European state since that war.
Eleanor Goodman in Berlin. So to the epicentre of it all, the Kosovan capital, Pristina, as the streets echoed to the sound of air raid sirens, and tonight, as we've heard, there have been explosions. Hundreds have been trying to leave the city before the bombing actually started, past checkpoints manned by heavily armed police. Elsewhere, homes lie abandoned as people try to flee across the border into Macedonia. Earlier this afternoon, our Foreign Affairs correspondent Gabi Rado sent this report from Pristina.
At 20 to 2 this afternoon, an air raid siren wailed over the centre of Pristina. It went on for half an hour. The local government told us it was not a rehearsal, but everyone on the streets assumed it was. We found the only air raid shelter the authorities were able to locate for us. It was padlocked and showed no sign of being prepared for an imminent emergency. Local people were either unimpressed by both the siren and the shelter, if there were Kosovo Albanians, or if Serb, angry at being approached by citizens of NATO countries. One said she'd call the police. There are Serbs in Pristina who know all too well what it's like to be under attack. Nevenka Grozdanic is a Serb driven from Croatia in 1995, since when she and her family have lived in this single hotel room. She's afraid she may become a refugee once more.
We experienced great fear for days when we travelled from Krajina to here, so we know fear, and we don't want to have to go through it again.
There were many who had already decided not to stay in Kosovo. The bus stations were doing a brisk last-minute trade in getting out those prepared to leave their homes for an indefinite period. At the market, what food there was for sale went quickly for fear of what the next few days will bring. More and more shops are staying shut because of the violence gradually breaking out. One of its most recent victims, 22-year-old Adriana Abdullahu, killed in a cafe bombing 2 nights ago, was remembered by her fellow actors in an open-air memorial service. She was an ethnic Albanian, but Serb students have also died in similar cafe attacks. Belgrade's senior politician in Kosovo says NATO will just be adding to the unrelenting violence.
We are happy to give the Albanians the autonomy they demand in Kosovo. We have proposed doing that. But we will not allow NATO forces the right to come here, to push people out, and to kill them and do absolutely anything they want. That is the thing we shall never accept.
As night falls in Pristina, the streets are fast emptying and the people indoors are staying close to their TVs and radios. Everyone knows that barring a miracle, the missiles are coming within hours. This is a totally polarized city, so reaction to the NATO attacks will also be at the two extremes. The majority Albanians will see it as the outside world finally extending a helping hand. But for the Serbs, it'll be the bitter confirmation that the West simply doesn't understand them and wants to impose its own violent solution on a matter which should have been settled between Serbs and Albanians. Gabi Rado, Channel 4 News, Pristina.
In Washington now, Peter Galbraith, who was American ambassador to Croatia throughout the Bosnian War and beyond, and an advisor to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Ambassador, where is this going to end?
It's not clear where it's going to end, and that depends very much on the objectives. I think if the objective is to stop the attacks on the people of Kosovo, then I think this operation has a good chance of success. And that seems to be where President Clinton believes it should be going. However, if the objective is to force Milosevic to sign a peace agreement, which he believes will lead to the independence of Kosovo, then I don't think that the bombing can achieve that objective.
But there are much wider dangers, as President Yeltsin has suggested, are there not?
Well, I think we certainly should be concerned about the views of the Russians. They're key partners in international security arrangements. On the other hand, if we had done nothing, we would have been looking the way as mass murder was being committed, and it would have clearly undermined the credibility of NATO and its effectiveness as a force for keeping the peace in Europe.
But when you were ambassador in Croatia, even at the beginning of your tour, people were talking about Kosovo. This is not something which has stolen up on the Western allies in dead of night. We've known about it for years, and we did nothing.
These attacks, in fact, come almost exactly on the 10th anniversary of the elimination of Kosovo's autonomy, the act by Milosevic that created the current Kosovo crisis. But it's not true that we did nothing. In December 1992, on Christmas Eve, President Bush sent Milosevic a warning that if he waged war against the people of Kosovo, he would face a military response. And it may be that that warning helped keep the peace there for 7 years. But in the last year, Milosevic has decided to cross the line, and I think that has inevitably led to the action taken by the United States, the United Kingdom, and the other NATO allies today.
But knowing what you know, can you really sleep easily tonight?
I certainly don't sleep easily when there are airstrikes going on in Europe, but this is a situation where there simply were no good alternatives. And I think NATO has taken a course of action that has some chance of success and is better than the other alternatives. But it is a choice among terrible options, and it's always terrible when lives are being lost as they are now.
Ambassador Galbraith, thank you for talking with us. Well, now, Tony Blair has actually been talking to Eleanor Goodman whilst we've been on air. They're in Berlin at the Berlin summit. Here it is.
Tonight's attack alone will not bring the curtain down on the scenes you have been witnessing, of families fleeing their homes and trudging towards as yet undiscovered sanctuary. Nor can we be sure about how Milosevic will respond, but I repeat this warning. Just as we have made good the threat to attack if he did not comply with the agreement he'd entered into, so if there is retaliation against NATO forces elsewhere in the region, our response will be swift and severe. The forces ranged against Milosevic are truly international. NATO is united. Of the 13 nations who have made aircraft available, 8 are in action tonight. Britain is a peaceful nation. We are a peaceful people who take no joy in war. But we know from our own history and from our own character that there are times when we have to stand up and fight for peace. When force is the final resort of those who know that the only peace that ever lasts is a just peace, a peace based on justice. Justice is all that those poor people driven from their homes in their thousands in Kosovo are asking for. The chance to live free from fear. We have in our power the means to help them secure justice. And we have a duty to see that justice is now done.
Good evening. NATO is tonight at war with Yugoslavia. The first missiles and laser-guided bombs began falling about 4 hours ago around Pristina in Kosovo, whose Albanian population NATO is pledged to protect. Others were aimed at military facilities near Belgrade and right across the Yugoslavian regions of Serbia and Montenegro. The British submarine HMS Splendid was involved in the first attacks. So were RAF Harriers, all of which are said to have returned safely. In the last hour, Yugoslavia has declared a state of war, and the United Nations Security Council is meeting now at Russia's request.
The roads of Kosovo today are filled with the hardware of war. Army vehicles camouflaged for the first time in weeks. Troops at the ready. Serbian children cheering them on. We drove to a military base. The tanks that may be targeted by NATO dug in. Troops nearby relaxed. Their newspapers carry little news of NATO's threats and no news of the villages and civilians they've targeted. Western leaders say airstrikes forced the Serbs to sign a peace deal once before in Bosnia, and it can work here. But in Bosnia, these Serbian troops were exhausted after 4 years of war. Here, they are fresh, they have the rebels on the run, and their president wants to test NATO to the limit. Albanians and Serbs here are anxious, crowding banks to withdraw their money, buying bread before the conflict forces the bakeries to close. It's not the threat of airstrikes that's forcing the Vesele family onto the road. Serb troops attacked their village 5 weeks ago. They fled to a second village, attacked this week. I don't want war, he says, but NATO has to help us. Some are beyond help. They are burying an 82-year-old Albanian refugee who died after fleeing the shelling here.
We heard earlier what Tony Blair was saying today about the military action now involving British servicemen and women. The Prime Minister, of course, is in Berlin at an EU summit completely overshadowed by the Kosovo crisis. Our political editor, Michael Brunson, is there and he joins us now. So, Michael, Mr. Blair spoke of a limited operation. Is that realistic?
Yes, well, what he said on that is important, I think. Perhaps the most important thing he had to say tonight. He said, we're taking this action for one very simple reason, to damage Serb forces sufficiently to prevent Milosevic from continuing to perpetuate his vile oppression. Indeed, he was told about an hour ago, while he was still negotiating in the EU summit, he was passed a note and were told that all the British planes that had been flying tonight had arrived safely. Well, now, so far so good, but the Prime Minister himself has warned that it may not be this easy. He's warned that Milosevic may react in all kinds of ways, perhaps attacking NATO forces in Macedonia. And he says, Mr. Blair says, we will hit back very hard. But you know, this is just what the defence chiefs are worried about, because they think that the politicians may perhaps be going into something which they can't see the real outcome of. It may be long and drawn out and rather difficult.
Thank you, Michael. So NATO is attacking a sovereign nation for the first time in its history. But what led the alliance to this? What's the strategy and what are the risks? Our defence correspondent Kevin Dunn reports.
The NATO action is aimed at preventing a repetition of scenes like these. The systematic looting and burning by the Serbs of ethnic Albanian villages, as ITN witnessed only last week. 20,000 ethnic Albanians have been driven from their homes in the last 4 days alone, threatening the humanitarian catastrophe which NATO says it wants to avert. But can airstrikes, no matter how potent or prolonged, achieve the political objective of getting the Serbs to sign a peace agreement, and if so, at what cost? NATO's airstrikes tonight have been aimed at specific military targets. In this crucial first phase, cruise missiles and stealth bombers hit sophisticated air defences and key military installations. Yugoslavia is reporting explosions in 7 towns, including Novi Sad, where there's an army base, outside Belgrade at several air bases, in Kragujevich, site of an army base and an anti-aircraft defence system, in Montenegro at an anti-aircraft defence site and airbase, and in Kosovo targets included the military and commercial airport near Pristina.
The primary targets for the initial wave must surely be the air defence, command, control, communication and airfield sites of the Serb forces. The reason for this, quite obviously, is to remove any threat that there may be to the actual NATO air force itself.
The strikes are being monitored from a bunker under the Ministry of Defence, filmed for the first time when the Prime Minister ordered attacks on Iraq. Ministry of Defence officials are acutely aware that RAF pilots could be shot down over Serbia. Tonight, all 4 Harriers returned safely to their base, but their pilots know they may have to fly many more missions before this campaign is over. Kevin Dunn, ITN, at the Ministry of Defence.
In the last half hour or so, the Pentagon has been giving a briefing on today's military action, and ITN's Mark Austin has the latest.
This evening in Washington, President Clinton cancelled all engagements to concentrate on the progress of a military operation about which this country is deeply uncertain. The NATO allies may be united, but Russia tonight called an emergency meeting of the Security Council in New York to protest the strikes.
Well, there is international law, and it must be respected. That's in essence is our position.
Secretary General Kofi Annan said he understood force might have to be used in pursuit of peace, but said the UN should have been involved in the decision.
The Security Council has primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security. And this is explicitly acknowledged in the North Atlantic Treaty.
Within the last hour, US military chiefs have been outlining the operation so far and warning of the risks involved.
The air defense system in Yugoslavia is very capable, and it poses a considerable threat to NATO aircraft involved in the operation. And although at this point we have no indication of casualties to US or NATO forces, we're continue to take all measures to reduce the risk to our pilots and air crews.
In just under 2 hours' time here, President Clinton will go on primetime television to try and persuade the American public of the wisdom of the bombing raids now underway. And it's a public that needs persuading. A poll out tonight shows 43% of the American people oppose the strikes. The stakes are high, and the man in the White House knows it only too well. Mark Austin, ITN, Washington.
Now for a look at tomorrow's newspapers. Not surprisingly, they're dominated by the airstrikes. The Telegraph talks of the shockwaves in Belgrade, rocked by bombs, and the British role in the strikes over a picture of a B-52 leaving RAF Fairford. The Independent reports that they began to end what Tony Blair called President Milosevic's vile oppression. The Times says NATO allies pound the Serbs and reports in more detail the role of Britain's Harriers and submarine. The Express describes the airstrikes as an onslaught and suggests that Europe could be facing its biggest conflict since World War II. And the Sun too has its own verdict on the Kosovo crisis and the strikes against Serbia and its president, Slobodan Milosevic.
So what were the effects of last night's bombings? Well, NATO says over 40 targets were hit, but there's no information yet on the damage caused. The Serbs did fight back, and NATO says 3 Serb planes were shot down. As for Britain's involvement, well, we were told that HMS Splendid fired her Tomahawk cruise missiles successfully. The target, a radar installation near Pristina, that we were informed was an important link in the Serbian air defences. We weren't told if the missiles hit. A nearby ammunition dump was the target for the British Harriers. 6 took off, but no bombs hit. They found it obscured by fire and smoke from earlier attacks.
Bombs from our first aircraft lost lock once they were in flight and fell short of a target on open ground. As a result, the following Harriers aborted their attack and returned to base with their weapons.
But is the overall policy working? The stated aim is to stop Serbian oppression in Kosovo. NATO's commander said it was still going on today.
Serb military and police forces are continuing to attack in the Kosovo region today. We know this, although obviously without the presence of the OSCE verifiers on the ground, our information is much less clear.
Less clear for the media too. From now on, it'll be very hard to know what's happening in Kosovo. Journalists from NATO countries there and in Belgrade were ordered out today.
Well, our Foreign Affairs correspondent Gabi Rado was one of those journalists from NATO countries ordered out of the Serbian territory. He's now in the Macedonian capital, Skopje. Gabi, let's go back to your departure from Pristina, the capital of Kosovo. What happened?
Well, what happened was at about 2:30 this afternoon, we were all handed this sheet of paper, which is the expulsion order. It ordered out all journalists from countries within NATO and from countries which allowed their territory to be used for the springboard for the attacks. And what happened was that after quite a lot of tension around our hotel, a lot of aggression from the local population, we got into a convoy led by the Yugoslav securitist forces, and we drove the 50 miles or so south to the Macedonian border. It means that President Milosevic has taken a diametrically opposed, different tack to the Iraqis, to Saddam Hussein. He doesn't want journalists to be there, foreign journalists to be there, to see the damage, to see the casualties, perhaps.
Right. Well, on the matter of damage, Gabby, just tell us on the matter of damage, what did you actually see in Pristina?
In Pristina, all we saw was from our hotel. We were prevented from leaving our hotel, and we saw the smoking ruins. We think it was around the area of the barracks, as Julian, I think, said, and it probably was a fuel dump because that fire burnt long and bright and late into the night.
If you just joined us, there is a heavy aerial bombardment of Yugoslavia underway for the second night running, and news just in from aboard the US Gonzales, a destroyer in the Adriatic. 4 American warships have launched Tomahawk missiles, and the reporter states that the activity is faster and heavier than the opening volleys on Wednesday. Now, the meeting of European Union leaders in Berlin has been overshadowed by the NATO action. Our political editor, Eleanor Goodman, has been keeping track of the political leaders there. Eleanor.
Well, the aim of all the political leaders here has been to try to present a united front against Milosevic, but they've also been acutely aware of the need to carry public opinion with them back home, hence Tony Blair's decision to give a prime ministerial broadcast tomorrow. And the Italian prime minister's claim that the attacks on Serbia had already persuaded the Serbs to drop their attacks on the Kosovans, and that perhaps now is the time to resume diplomacy. Those remarks have to be seen in the context of the vote that D'Alema faces tomorrow in the Italian Parliament about the use of his air bases. But they were seized upon here as evidence of splits within the alliance. Tony Blair immediately asked for clarification, and he was apparently told by the Prime Minister that the Italian Prime Minister, that he did believe the time was approaching when talking should begin. But as Tony Blair insisted in an interview afterwards, D'Alema had not, he said, been calling for an immediate end to airstrikes.
What's being said is simply that if you can find a political solution, find a political solution. But I can assure you the Italian Prime Minister is fully behind the action that's being taken. A political initiative can only be successful in circumstances where Milosevic is abiding by the agreements he's entered into, and everybody is completely clear in this. And this is a situation which everyone should understand. We have a specific military objective to stop the repression, to protect the civilian people in Kosovo, and we will carry out that military objective.
Given what you say, so the suggestion is there will be further raids. What are you doing to pursue, if you like, the other track, which is to try and find out what Milosevic's response is, whether he is now prepared to come into line, and what would be a measure of his good faith?
Milosevic is no doubt as to what he needs to do. I mean, it doesn't require us to write him a letter and explain it. We've said very clearly what he has to do. What he has to do is abide by the agreements he's entered into.
But how do we establish what he's doing now, given that we're now in the business of bombing him?
We know exactly what he has to do. He knows what he has to do. He has been engaged in a policy of repression and brutality against the Kosovar civilian people. He has broken his word time and time again. I mean, this is a man for 10 years has plunged this part of the world into chaos and instability. He knows exactly what he has to do. So he doesn't need us to remind him of it. He needs to act, to come back into compliance.
In practical terms, what should he do? I mean, how does he, if you like, wave the white flag?
Well, it's not a question of waving the white flag. It's a question of behaving in a decent and civilized way to people that are supposed to be under his control and part of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia.
So he calls his military police back into barracks. What does he do in practice?
Well, as I've said to you, Ellen, what he does in practice is abide by the October agreements, and that set out a whole series of things that he was supposed to do, including getting his heavy artillery out, making sure that his troops were reduced to proper levels, making sure that they were not engaged in repression and brutality against the civilian population. Those are the things that have been there right from the very word go. There's absolutely no reason why he doesn't abide by that other than the fact he doesn't want to. I believe people accept why we're taking this action. They know the reluctance that is there, they know the seriousness of intent that is there, they know the reasons for it. But it's important always to remind people. This is a humanitarian catastrophe that we have to avoid. There are tens of thousands of people that will die or will be driven from their homes, and this place, Kosovo, is right on the doorstep of Europe. It's right next door to Greece, to Italy, to places people are very, very familiar with in Britain. This is why we have to act.
And in the last few minutes, Downing Street has said that Tony Blair had a 20-minute conversation with the Russian Prime Minister Primakov, in which he presumably rehearsed those same arguments about the need for airstrikes. It was said that the conversation was friendly, but that the differences remained.
The fear now is that the trouble could spread far through the region, embroiling neighbouring Albania and Macedonia. There are worries too that the fragile peace in Bosnia could be destroyed, threatening Yugoslavia's other former republics and eventually engulfing arch-rivals Greece and Turkey. Well, in our Westminster studio is Lord William Wallace, defence spokesman for the Liberal Democrats in the House of Lords. He's also a professor of international relations at the London School of Economics. With me here in the studio is Dr. Michael Stenton, lecturer in modern history at Cambridge University, whose book on resistance movements in the Balkans is due out later in the year. Let's just start with you, Michael Stenton, because history, unfortunately, is pretty key to this whole business. How do you read the antecedents playing out now?
The nearest comparison to the present position today is when the Austrians marched into Bosnia in 1905. When they annexed Bosnia in 1905. They occupied it a long time before that. And Russia felt humiliated. And from that moment of humiliation came the diplomatic maneuvers that led to 1914. I do not think we are looking at a first-class international war in the immediate future. I do think we are looking at a re-stratification, redivision of Europe between the new expanded NATO and the nations that feel they have lost out, they have failed, they have been discriminated against. I think it's no longer a Balkan problem, it's a problem that is a first-class one for the new Russia. And the new Russia is feeling more aggrieved than ever before, and they still have nuclear weapons.
William Wallace, this sounds pretty dangerous. Is it an analysis you would share?
I think it's very important to try to keep the Russians on board. I was very glad to hear that Tony Blair has spent some time talking to Mr. Primakov. I think that the Russian government's reaction so far, different from that of President Yeltsin, has so far been relatively moderate. And I think we have to do our utmost to keep lines open to the Russians to make sure that they do not feel as humiliated this time as Dr. Stenton suggested they felt in 1905.
Yeah, I'm sorry, your earpiece is out, so I have to ask you to push it in again. It's in your, that's it. Now, what he actually said was that he doesn't think it's as serious this time, but nevertheless it is very important. He shared your view to keep the Russians on board. Now, given that, let's look at the immediate regional problems then. Shelling already from Serbian territory into Albania. Riots in Macedonia. How do you see the immediate regional problem playing out? Is Greece and Turkey eventually in danger?
I wouldn't put it that way. The immediate problem is what happens to the civilian population of Kosovo. Are they going to be put on the roads? Will they be crossing international borders in the next few days? The apparent motive for the NATO attacks is to protect civilians in Kosovo. The almost certain result, if fighting continues for another 2 or 3 days, is that the threat, the danger to Kosovo civilians will increase by at least an order of magnitude. It is possible that when 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 civilians cross into Macedonia, it will destabilize Macedonia. I'm not certain that that will happen in the short term because I think NATO and the United States is wealthy enough to cater for that number of refugees for a short period. But I do think that the risk of free guerrilla warfare across the border between Kosovo and Albania is a very real one.
Well, Lord Wallace, that therefore does beg the question which everybody has been searching for an answer to. What is the goal and how do we know whether we've reached it? And isn't the danger that this great spillage of refugees out across the borders will be the destabilizing consequence of what NATO is doing?
There is, of course, an intense danger of that, but let's be clear, before the bombing had started, the best estimates are that 100,000 Kosovans had been driven from their homes during the last month. That is what we are responding to. That is why, unfortunately, we had to take this action. There are, as Dr. Stenton has suggested, a large number of Kosovan refugees now up against the Macedonian border. Let's be clear where we were before. There are already 1 million refugees from the former Yugoslavia scattered across the European Union. This action is intended to stop an attempt to ethnically cleanse Kosovo in the way that Bosnia was ethnically cleansed.
Lord Wallace, I must cut you up there. I'm sorry, and Dr. Stenton too, because we're joined now on the line by Vuk Drašković, the Yugoslav Deputy Prime Minister. Vuk Drašković, you've broken diplomatic relations today with the United States, with Britain, with Germany and with France, but you've not broken them with Italy, which has been in action above Serb territory, and with Holland, for example. Why bother with some and not the others?
As far as Germany is concerned, things are very clear. This is the third time in this century Germans, planes and bombs attacking Serbs. And as far as Americans, British and French are concerned, we are especially deeply offended, surprised, disappointed. We never dreamed into the possibility our war allies from the First and the Second World War would bomb Serbia together with Germans.
Now, can I just ask you then about what you're doing in Kosovo? It's clear you're still very active against your own population in Kosovo, and now apparently shelling into Albania. What's happening?
I don't know really. I know only the fact we cannot find anyone Serb which is not thinking the airstrikes against Serbia were promoted by Albanian terrorists and separatists, and now NATO forces are military service of Albanian separatists and terrorists. My standing and the standing of federal government is Albanians are our citizens. We need them all the best. They can stay here. We are ready right now to sign the political settlement about the best maximum, the highest maximum of autonomy for them.
Deputy Prime Minister, I must cut in there. One last question. Are you going to sue for peace tonight?
Yes, of course. The political settlement on the base of the maximum of autonomy for Albanians, full equality of all citizens.
You will sign the Paris Agreement? You will sign the Paris Agreement?
Look, Paris Agreement is destroyed now by the bombs. Is that democracy? You are bombing us to accept something we don't like to accept the settlement of the dissolution of our state, to accept the settlement of promoting Kosovo into Third Republic or independent state.
Mr. Drašković, there we must leave it. Thank you very much for joining us from Belgrade. And we're joined again by General Sir Michael Rose, who, of course, was very much on watch as UN commander during the first airstrikes over Bosnia. General, what would your primary anxiety now be? That the goal is not clearly enough defined, that the politicians will split, or that the air attacks will be of no use?
Well, I'm sure the air attacks will do, as I said before, diminish the Serbian capability, military capability. I mean, NATO is a very powerful military force. But at the end of the day, will it change Milosevic's strategy? And that's where I wonder, because time ultimately is on the side of Milosevic. If he hunkers down, I don't think that the Western world will forever contemplate the sort of images that we've seen tonight. Therefore, NATO will have to come up with a second phase, and that's the difficult thing that I worry about.
The scale of what we're hearing tonight, which sounds bigger than last night, there seemed to be a lot more naval activity for a start, many more Tomahawk missiles and the rest of it. When you say hunker down, can you hunker down under that sort of material if it is well targeted?
Sure. I mean, there's been tremendous warning of these attacks. In 1995, when NATO launched 3,500 airstrikes against a much smaller set of targets, the Bosnian Serbs, the results were negligible in strategic terms. It was not a decisive blow. And the reason is, of course, that many of the targets that were engaged were empty. The barracks were surely hit by the missiles, the air bases were hit, the ammunition bunkers were hit, but there was nothing in them. He'd redeployed his forces. It rattled the leadership a little bit. It disrupted the chain of command briefly, but it didn't actually affect the price of fish at the end of the day.
And from your knowledge of working in these situations, do you think there is a second phase planned? And do you have any sense of what it might be? Because they seem to be ruling out ground forces.
Well, I believe that it's quite correct that we should not deploy NATO troops in an interventionist role in Kosovo. That would be a war fighting on the ground, which we're not signed up to, nor should we. But I believe that we could deploy NATO troops on the border between Macedonia and Albania and Kosovo, and thereby solve many of the problems we've heard discussed this evening: spillage, refugees, etc.
Sir Michael, thank you very much indeed. Well, now Lord Healey is at home in Sussex, and here in the studio is the Labour MP Barbara Follet, who entered Parliament at the last election. Denis Healey, very strange turn of events, but basically it is the old order who are saying this war is wrong.
Yes, because we understand war, and I was very interested to hear General Sir Michael Rose, who has fought a war recently, expressing exactly the same doubts as I feel, that airstrikes will not affect the fighting in Kosovo. They will strengthen Milosevic's position in his own country, and they will make an ultimate settlement more difficult. What we really need is serious negotiation with the Soviet Union to try to get Milosevic to honour his obligations he's already accepted.
Right, now, Barbara Follet, are you not worried when all those who've been there before, all those who have fought in anger and have had to run some of these institutions, like Lord Carrington, Lord Healey, are coming out against action?
I'm worried by the whole situation, but I think that Ben Bradshaw's right. It's a new world order, and the United Nations hasn't really caught up with that new world order. It's, you know, and they're talking about resolutions and the need for resolutions. They operated in a time when nation states invaded other nation states. What we've got here today is people's inhumane actions to other people. And I deplore war. War is a last resort. I am only in favour of war when it leads to peace, and that's why we're in it today.
Lord Healey, it seems that this is driven then by humanitarian consideration, no stomach for further ethnic cleansing or the massacring of innocent civilians.
Oh, this is certainly the reason why Bill Clinton and Tony Blair have decided to support the bombing of airfields in Yugoslavia. But my argument, and I have some experience of war, as has Peter Carrington and General de la Villiers, is that, and Michael Rose, is that it will not have the effect expected. What we really need now is to resume the negotiations, get Milosevic, who is a dreadful fellow, and the sooner he's got rid of the better, but we can't do it, and our actions are simply strengthening his position in Yugoslavia. We must get a combined effort by the Russians and the West to get him to negotiate and to accept his obligations. And all that we're doing now is making it much more difficult. It may even lead to the overthrow of Yeltsin by communist and nationalist extremists.
But Denis, with respect, we have been negotiating now for months and months. We've had 3 resolutions through the Security Council. 2 months ago, 45 civilians were massacred, shot at point-blank range, men, women and children. Civilians are dying now. We cannot stand back. You didn't stand back when Hitler invaded. We cannot stand back now with this inhumane behaviour. We have negotiated. We've reached the end of negotiations, and now we've got to do something.
I'm not asking us to stand back. I'm asking us to do something which will have the results that Barbara Follet wants. And the real trouble, I'm afraid, is that people who have no experience of war do not realise that what we're now doing is strengthening Milosevic inside his own country. It is doing nothing to help the civilians who are being massacred in Kosovo.
But Denis,
and
we didn't
producing a
Hitler.
change of government in Russia which would be disastrous to all of us. I fought against the appeasement policy towards Hitler. I don't believe in appeasing Milosevic, but I think if you're going to refer to the 30s, read a little bit of history first.
Lord Healey, Barbara Follet, there we must leave it. Thank you both very warmly for coming in. So we leave you for a second night running with continuing NATO air attacks on Serbia. There have been reports of explosions in the Kosovan capital Pristina and near the Serbian capital Belgrade. While we've been on air, the US Pentagon has warned that these new strikes are substantive and severe, and as we go, reports are coming in that Allied planes are now arriving back at their bases in Italy.
Good evening. NATO launched a second wave of airstrikes against Yugoslavia tonight, again hitting targets around Belgrade and Pristina, the provincial capital of Kosovo. Dozens of aircraft, including British Harriers, have been in action, with ships in the Adriatic again firing off cruise missiles. Yugoslavia, which reported 10 civilian deaths in yesterday's raids, said tonight it was breaking off diplomatic relations with the United States, Britain, France and Germany. It seems the heaviest attacks tonight have been in Kosovo. ITN's Bill Neely was there today until he was expelled, along with other correspondents from NATO countries. He joins us now from over the border in Macedonia. Bill, what have you seen and heard tonight?
Well, I witnessed the beginning of the airstrikes last night in Kosovo. I have seen and heard the second wave tonight. At about 6:05 London time, there was a very loud and deep explosion, followed very quickly by 5 more, all within about 1 minute. And then on the horizon, flashes, large orange glows in the sky. Kosovo is about 10 miles from here, and that was very clearly the target.
And Bill, you were expelled from Kosovo itself today. How did the Serb authorities handle that?
Well, initially we were told this morning that we were welcomed. Then the governor of Kosovo warned us to be responsible. And then at 12 o'clock I received this. It's an order from the Republic of Serbia ordering me out of the country and claiming that my reports had helped to provoke NATO's aggression. They did nothing of the kind, I can assure you. The next 2 hours were very difficult indeed. Our car was stolen by armed troops. Another car was set alight. There were gunshots, and eventually we were escorted to the border. The real worry now is that the world is blind to what is happening in Kosovo itself.
Thanks a lot, Bill. Well, as we've just heard, Bill Neely was in Pristina, the provincial capital of Kosovo, when the NATO bombs and missiles were falling last night. Here's his report on that.
The siren heralding war in Kosovo. Minutes later, a distant rumble. The first bomb had fallen. The Serbian gunners opened up. Then, on the horizon, a massive explosion. Then, more anti-aircraft fire. First in the distance, then in front of me. Arching up into the sky, hitting, from my vantage point, nothing. We could see police and troops move. We couldn't move from our hotel window. Armed men were roaming the corridors. The bombardment was intensive to the north and to the south. Then, suddenly, the lights went out throughout the capital. The bombardment of Kosovo lasted for hours, but it is impossible to assess the damage or to say what this was. The official Serb media center says it was a plastics factory. The Serbs also say women and children died in the bombing of Kosovo. But it's also clear the Serbian military is still attacking ethnic Albanian towns and villages here. Today we were invited to meet Kosovo's governor. We had our car stolen by Serb soldiers as we left. The governor did not want to speak on camera, but he warned NATO that it could not establish peace with missiles. The bombing continued until the early morning, the Serbs confirming that an airport and one military base here has been hit. They are calling NATO's bombing a crime against humanity that they have not deserved. It is difficult to report accurately exactly what is going on here. Cameras are being smashed, journalists harassed, several have been expelled. I had 3 armed men in my hotel room last night questioning me about whether or not I was signaling to the NATO planes. But what is clear here is that this is a land at war, a land of extreme danger, not so much to us, but to the Serbian troops who are based here and to the ethnic Albanians who now face the wrath of the Serbian military. Bill Neely, ITN, Pristina, Kosovo.
The main news again, NATO launched a second wave of missile and bombing attacks against Yugoslavia tonight, again hitting targets around Belgrade and Pristina. And now for a look at tomorrow's newspapers. And again, they're dominated by the NATO airstrikes. The Times leads with NATO's split over air campaign. It says Italy and Greece are both doubtful about continuing with the bombing. The Telegraph says Milosevic takes swift revenge as NATO jets renew onslaught. The paper reports that the president has ordered a violent backlash against Kosovo's Albanians. The Express also reports on the plight of the Albanians left in Kosovo. Still they murder us is their headline. The Guardian talks about the Serbs remaining defiant as the missile attacks go on. They say Yugoslavia has officially severed links with the NATO allies and that the bombing attacks were worse tonight than the initial ones. And The Sun says nowhere to hide. It warns President Milosevic that he'll be bombed until he surrenders. Good evening. The conflict over Kosovo escalated tonight as Allied jets shot down 2 Yugoslavian warplanes. The MiG-29s were apparently trying to fire on NATO peacekeeping troops in Bosnia. Earlier, NATO launched its first daylight airstrikes against Yugoslavia as concern grows that the Serb-led crackdown in Kosovo is intensifying. Tonight, eyewitness reports claim an increasing number of atrocities against Kosovo's ethnic Albanian population. The shooting down of the MiGs coincided with the release of the first cockpit video of the damage inflicted on Serb targets. Kevin Dunn reports.
The MiG-29 is the most sophisticated warplane in Serbia's air force, but of a squadron of 16, the Serbs have lost 5 in 3 days.
F-15C fighters shot down 2 MiG-29s over Bosnia.
Earlier, the Ministry of Defence released the first cockpit video footage of a successful attack by RAF Harriers on 2 ammunition storage depots.
The Harriers last night flew what we call a cooperative attack.
Group Captain Steve Parkinson described the footage on which sensitive information has been blocked out as the bombs struck.
You can see there that's a large explosion indicative of a secondary explosion with the weapons inside the storage area now exploding.
There was no mention of casualties on the ground, and video of attacks which were aborted was not shown. This was the attack on a second ammunition dump.
This is where he has to maneuver his aeroplane because he believes he may be attacked. He comes out of that maneuver, the equipment quickly locates the exact area and the pilot refines the mark in plenty of time to safely execute the attack. Rapid impact there, bit of smoke at the bottom of the picture, that's from the first, from his leader's bombs. Surely those weapons inside those storage areas will now have been destroyed.
At NATO headquarters, similar footage from American planes was shown. Again, no estimate of casualties inflicted by the attacks.
You can see there is the graticule that's on the target, and there you can see where the explosion has occurred. Now, this is an ammunition facility, and you can tell by the veracity of the fire that's coming out that there has definitely been a fair amount of explosive in there.
RAF Harrier jets were again involved in the day's action, flying from their base in southern Italy. Our correspondent Tom Bradby reports from there.
In southern Italy tonight, British pilots have been preparing for further combat. There has been a mood of greater confidence today, the men relieved to have hit 2 out of 3 targets on their last mission. They were willing to talk about it, but only with their backs to camera, in case this is recorded by the Serbs.
And when I saw them go off, I must admit it was an impressive sight. It hit an ammo storage, which I know has been talked about on the news already today. Ammo storage, which went up with a huge explosion, lit up the whole countryside for miles around. And I thought, yes, on target.
For almost all the men here, this has been the first experience of combat.
Fear, I think you're very, very busy indeed. You are certainly tense, but I think you're too busy at the actual time when it's important to be thinking about much else than the job you've got to do at the time there.
So far, the men have not met significant resistance, but they're well aware this can change at any point. Each night now, the Harriers are going up at a different time because the military planners are trying to ensure they don't set any kind of pattern. Tom Bradby, ITN, Southern Italy.
The Prime Minister made a rare televised address to the nation tonight to explain why he felt the airstrikes are justified. Mr. Blair also spoke of the burden of sending troops into action.
I can tell you that the longest hours of any Prime Minister's life are those spent waiting to hear that the crews sent into battle are back safely. Far more agonizing is the wait for their families. They are in our thoughts and prayers tonight. I would never expose our brave servicemen and women to those risks unless I believed that I had to. We are doing what is right for Britain, for Europe, for a world that must know that barbarity cannot be allowed to defeat justice. This is simply the right thing to do.
Russia continued its opposition to the airstrikes today. It tried and failed to get the UN Security Council to condemn the action against Yugoslavia and said it was expelling NATO representatives from Moscow. From the Russian capital, here's our correspondent Mark Webster.
Russian riot police stood guard outside the American embassy in Moscow again tonight as angry protesters voiced their opposition to the NATO airstrikes. Sensing the country's mood, President Yeltsin called in his top military officials, determined to show that Russia still has some international political muscle despite its impoverished economy. But the NATO officials, given 24 hours to leave the country, said they regretted Russia's decision.
The NATO action was forced upon NATO by the behavior of Milosevic and is not at all directed against Russia.
While this will inevitably mean a new iciness in East-West relations, Moscow can't afford to take any drastic political measures because the dreadful state of its economy means it's still far too dependent on Western financial help. Mark Webster, ITN, Moscow.
And now for a look at tomorrow's newspapers. Growing evidence of Serb atrocities dominates most of the front pages. The Daily Telegraph says children used as human shields. It shows a picture of some of the refugees who fled Kosovo. Serbs on murder spree, says the Times, saying in one incident 20 Kosovo Albanian villagers were shot against a school wall. The Express calls it the tyrant's revenge and says Milosevic has ordered his thugs to turn on Albanian civilians. The Daily Mail has a different lead story, an interview with a father who says his daughter's life was wrecked by Graham Rix, the Chelsea coach starting a jail sentence for having sex with an underage girl. Might is right, says The Sun. It says Tony Blair's justification of the airstrikes delivered a rallying cry to the nation. Barbarity cannot be allowed to defeat justice. Good evening. The almost biblical flow of refugees out of Kosovo speeded up today as NATO announced it was stepping up the tempo of its raids on Yugoslavia. Tony Blair told MPs the alliance intended to finish the job and would be hitting President Milosevic's tanks and artillery and the thugs driving out the Kosovo Albanians. Those escaping today have been begging for help. They're starting lives in exile with nothing, stripped even of their identity papers. Since the NATO bombing started a week ago tonight, 170,000 are estimated to have fled Kosovo. About 20,000 a day are now crossing into Albania itself. Some 5,000 a day are getting into Macedonia, and 10,000 a day are finding their way into Montenegro. ITN's Mark Austin has the latest from there.
This evening in driving rain, they continued to climb the mountain pass to safety. Among them, 2 mothers trying to protect their babies against the bitter cold. Stuck in the snow, a van we found carrying a cargo of human misery. They are the women and the children from one small village in Kosovo. Their husbands and fathers are missing. The driver told us they were taken away by Serb paramilitaries. If it's true, they may never see their menfolk again. This woman, who's walked for 36 hours with her daughter, said her husband was a fighter in the Kosovo Liberation Army. He had been captured with others, and she said they were herded together at Serb military installations, the targets of NATO bombing. They are uncorroborated stories, like all the stories emerging from Kosovo at the moment. But almost everyone fleeing from their homeland is saying the same thing. Heavy overnight snow in the mountains has stemmed the flow of refugees. Those who made it across say thousands of others are stranded, cold and hungry. But the vast majority of the ethnic Albanian population are either out or coming out. These refugees are now safe. They tell us the only people left in their town are those too weak to leave or those still fighting the Serbs. Through a campaign of systematic violence and killing, or simply through the threat of it, the Serbs have achieved what they want to achieve. This tiny republic of Yugoslavia is under intense strain, but they're keeping the border open for the refugees. Some have relatives here, but most are in desperate need.
Please help us.
You see where sleep my baby. I don't know what to do, where to go. Not just I, but all the people from Kosovo. Please help us.
Locals in Montenegro are providing bread for the hungry, but any substantial aid has yet to arrive. All these people can do is try to survive, uprooted and unwanted in the country of their home. Mark Austin, ITN, on the Montenegro-Kosovo border.
Macedonia was again slow today to admit refugees from Kosovo, hundreds of whom arrived by train today. They described being forced on board at gunpoint. ITN's Colin Baker saw what happened to them when they reached the border.
They're using trains now to cleanse Kosovo, a race of people being killed and expelled, a dark shade of history repeated, and a cry uttered 6 decades ago is now heard again. Who will help us? But not the Macedonians this time. The refugees were kept on the train at the border. Only a few were allowed off. They'd been rounded up at gunpoint by the Serbs, made to board the train. They thought they were going to their deaths. Then they saw the border, but instead of safety, only despair, as they realized they were being sent back to the hell they thought they'd escaped 12 hours earlier. But the train did come back this morning. This time the refugees, 2,000 of them, were allowed to walk across the frontier. Their last week's experiences horrifying.
I just wanted to say, just if somebody can hear me, just if somebody can help us, our people. I don't know what to say else. I stay in the basement 3 days and wait for somebody to kill us.
The 2 sisters were killed. Their stories are all identical, of fear, of shooting, of death, of anarchy targeted against the ethnic Albanians. And once again, stories of trains being used in Europe like cattle trucks to remove the unwanted. Thousands more this evening are still waiting to get out. Colin Baker, ITN, on the Macedonia-Kosovo border.
The aid agencies warned today that the displaced Albanians of Kosovo could soon face starvation without more outside help. The Prime Minister said he would consider a suggestion that the government should match private donations pound for pound. President Clinton tonight pledged $50 million. This evening, a second plane load of British aid left Prestwick Airport near Glasgow with hundreds of tents and blankets. 8 more British Mercy flights are planned. Tonight's main news again, the flow of refugees out of Kosovo speeded up today as NATO stepped up bombing raids. Here the Defence Secretary said we're not going away before the people of Kosovo can go home and live in peace. Now for a look at tomorrow's newspapers. All are leading on the crisis facing the refugees from Kosovo. The Guardian reports that NATO forces are planning to counter pessimism over the effectiveness of the war by targeting the Yugoslav military and secret police forces in Kosovo. The Independent leads with an eyewitness report telling the story of one group of refugees. It says 2 infants died when the group were detained by Macedonian border police on a freezing mountaintop. The Express is launching an appeal to help the refugees. Its headline says, fill a plane and halt their misery. The Mirror's front page says echoes of the Nazis, and over a picture of fleeing refugees asks 1939 or 1999. And The Sun has its own verdict on NATO and Tony Blair's decision to step up the bombing on the Serbs. And that's the news tonight. The ITV Evening News is at 6:30 tomorrow, and we're back at 11. From all of us on the ITV Nightly News, good night.